Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. So I quickly want to do an introduction to this video. This is going to be my collection and declutter for my eyeshadow palettes. Now I do want to put a disclaimer out there that I do have a lot of eyeshadow palettes. I do purchase all of these palettes with my own money. And I have recently started purchasing a lot more eyeshadow palettes because I'm pretty new to makeup. I've only been playing around with makeup for the past 3 years or so. So I do like to experiment with a lot of different formulations. So I did want to do a collection and declutter to kind of get rid of some of the palettes that I know haven't really been working for me. But I'm not going to get rid of palettes just to get rid of palettes to kind of give that wow factor. I'm not going to be decluttering like 50% of my makeup collection because I do spend money on these palettes, and a lot of the times, especially for my bigger palettes, and I think I'll talk about it a little bit more in the video, I think long and hard before I purchase a big or a large eyeshadow palette because they are more on the expensive side. That's why I have such a hard time getting rid of large eyeshadow palettes. With these smaller ones, especially the drugstore ones, if I just don't like the formula, I'm going to pass it on to somebody. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you're interested in seeing my mainly collection and somewhat of a declutter, then just keep on watching.
Alrighty, so these are all of my Colourpop shadows. So I have the Kathleen Lights Dream Street. This one right here is Double Entendre. You Had Me at Hello, Femme Rosa, the Cute AF palette, or the Yes Please palette. This one is the I Think I Love You palette, Element of Surprise. I'm going to be keeping all of those, and then this is the Too Faced Just Peachy palette. I actually really like this palette, so I'm going to be keeping this one as well. Sorry, I didn't mean to blind you guys. And then the last palette back here is from Pure. This is the Soiree Diaries. I love this palette, so I'm actually going to be keeping this one. I got it as part of like a BoxyCharm. I think it was part of BoxyCharm, and I absolutely fell in love with this palette. I highly recommend it if you guys see it. Pick it up. It's definitely one of my all-time favorite palettes. These right here are all of my Buxom palettes. So this is the one that I made myself. I pretty much picked out a whole bunch of bright colors that I normally don't have in other palettes. So I'm going to be keeping this one. This is the Buxom White Russian on the Rocks palette. I'm also going to be keeping this one. I have the May Contain Nudity palette. And then I also have the Dolly's Wild Side palette. So I'm going to be keeping those. I am, however, going to be getting rid of this Stila palette. I purchased this as part of like a set a few holidays ago, so I kept it because of this shade right here, but I actually have a palette that has the exact same shade already in it, and I prefer that one to this palette because this one pretty much, I only really use it for this shade because I have several other eyeshadows that are the same in other palettes, so I'm just going to be passing this one along. These right here are all from Dose of Colors. So this is the Blushing Berries palette. I actually recently picked this one up along with the Sassy Sienna palette. So that's what those two look like. As you can tell, they're brand new. I haven't even used these guys yet. I just picked them up with my last Ulta 20% off coupon. I also have the Marvelous Mauves palette, or Marvelous Mauves palette. I should really get rid of these little brushes because I really don't use them. And then the Baked Browns palette. I love those. I'm going to be getting rid of this one right here. This is the e.l.f. Prism palette. And I really only held on to this palette for this shade right here, this peachy one. But I just don't use it enough. And I have other peachy shadows like this in my collection. So I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of that one. And this is the one that I decided to keep. This is the Blink Electric Eyes palette. This is a very similar shade to the Stila palette, and it also has the other like golden colors in the Stila palette as well. It's very similar. It's similar enough. I honestly don't wear that many cranberry shimmery shades on my lids, or purpley shimmery shades on my lids, and I actually like this cranberry shade a lot better. This is the one from the Stila palette, and this is the one from the Blink Electric Eyes palette. And I love the formula of this. They're very, very smooth and buttery shadows, so I'd much rather keep this one than the e.l.f. and the Stila palette. These two I actually recently got. This is the Wet n Wild Petal Pusher palette and the Comfort Zone palette, but I actually think I'm going to deep pot some of these shadows. I also have a couple little small palettes here. This is called the Velour Vixen and the Plaid to the Bone little trios. I think I'm going to depot some of these because I honestly don't reach for them on their own. I really love certain shades in this palette, like this one right here is absolutely stunning. I love this shadow. It is so gorgeous. I don't have any shadows quite like that in my collection, so I'm going to be depotting, like I said, some of these, and then kind of making a little Wet n Wild Z palette out of that, or whatever magnetic palette I have. I'm also going to be getting rid of these two. These are from the Balm. These are like their little mini face palettes. I've held on to these for so many years. This one's the California one, and then there's a Hawaii one. I've held on to these for so many years, and I quite honestly don't use them. I'm going to see if somebody else wants them, and if nobody wants them, then I'm honestly just going to put them on display, because I think the packaging is so pretty, but I do not use them. So I'm going to try and pass them on first, and if, again, nobody wants them, then I'm just going to put them on display. Then I have 3 palettes from Milani. I'm trying not to blind you guys with this Milani packaging. This first one here is in Earthy Elements, and I absolutely love that orangey shade right there, so I'm going to be keeping that one. This is Plum Basics. I don't have that many shadows or eyeshadow palettes that are these cool tone like purple colors, so I'm definitely going to be keeping this one. And this was actually the first one I ever picked up. This one is in 02 Bare Necessities, and I really, really like this one. This was a really nice neutral palette. I feel like I can get a put together look with these palettes versus the Wet n Wild ones. I feel like I have to pull shades from other palettes to really complete my look. So that's why I like these over like the Wet n Wild Comfort Zone palette. And then these two, I think I'm going to keep for a little bit longer. These are from Ciate. This is the Smoky Suede's Eye Palette. And then this is the Smoldering Eye Palette. And I have used these, and I've gotten some really nice looks out of them, but I quite honestly don't use these that often. So next decluttering, if I find that I haven't used these in a whole year, I'm actually going to get rid of them. I am doing like a weekly makeup basket where I try to use a palette a week to see if I really like it. And I really try and I'm trying to focus on palettes like these where I don't really know if I want to keep them on my collection or not. And this was the case with this one. This is the NYX Ultimate, the Warm Neutrals palette. And I used this palette for a week, and I talked about it during my weekly makeup basket. And I ended up just not liking this palette. I found that most of the eye looks, even though I came out with cute eye looks or pretty eye looks, I really feel like I have other shadows in my collection already that are the same tones, the same colors, and I like using those palettes a lot better than, a lot more than this. It took too much work to build up the color with this palette. So this is a palette I'm actually going to be passing along. The same goes with this. I don't think I have filmed a weekly makeup basket with this one. This is from Winky Lux, and this was like a BoxyCharm palette that I got. I just don't find myself gravitating towards these colors, and I've only used this palette maybe for about a week. I only use it like maybe 3 or 4 times, and I feel like somebody else could get better use out of this palette, so I'm just going to pass that palette along. This is from the Balm Apetite palette, Apetite palette, or whatever it's called. It's a really pretty palette. I love this shade right here. Absolutely gorgeous. Some of these shades aren't super unique, but I think it's a really well put together palette. I don't seem to have to reach for other colors whenever I'm using this palette. So I'm actually going to keep this one. But again, this is another one that I'm thinking about decluttering from my collection. And then these, even though I don't use these as much, this was from like a Too Faced holiday collection a few years back. Even though I don't use these palettes that often, I still really like them, and they do bring me joy. This was, I think, the first Too Faced holiday collection that I ever picked up. They do have eyeshadows and a couple of cheek products in here, and they smell absolutely divine. This one smells like gingerbread, this one smells like peppermint, and this one kind of smells like a latte. They do work really well, and like I said, even though I don't reach for them, I still find that they give me joy whenever I use them or whenever I look at them. So I'm still going to keep them in my collection despite the fact that I don't use them that often because, like I said, they still bring me joy. This one is beautiful to look at, but I just don't find myself reaching for this that often. This is the Rainforest of the Sea Volume 2 palette. This is one of the ones that I want to use because I've only swatched this palette and then used it once, and I don't feel like I've given it a fair shot. So I do want to use this during my one palette for 1 week to see if I really like this palette. So I'm going to add it to the list because I am keeping a list of items that I want to use. So these two are one of the ones that I want to use. Same thing with the Ciate palettes. I'm going to keep this one. This one is the Make Believe in Yourself Eye and Cheek palette. And I bought this because I don't have that many bright colors in my collection. And these are kind of perfect to wear all over the lid. So I am going to be keeping this one. I picked it up when it was on sale, but I am going to be keeping that one. And then the last two palettes I have here are also from Tarte. This is the Tarte Showstopper palette. I love this palette. I do get a lot of use out of it, even though it is a fairly neutral palette. As you guys can see, I have used this palette quite a bit, and I really, really love the blush in here. So even if I were to get rid of this palette, I would probably depot the blush because the blush in here is absolutely stunning. And then this is the Rainforest After Dark palette. I use this one a little bit less because it is those like plummy purple colors, and I don't use that many like cool tone shadows like this, but I still really like the shadows in here. And again, the blush in here is absolutely defined. I feel like these are a lot softer than the Tarte blushes that come like in single pans, and I have a lot of those, and I feel like it's like a different formulation. I really, really like the blushes in these like round face palettes. So I actually got rid of quite a few eyeshadow palettes. I have another section of like smaller eyeshadow palettes. I'm going to include those in my overview of my like makeup collection, but I'm not going to be showing those today because quite honestly I'm probably going to keep all of those palettes. I'm going to quickly show you guys this drawer because quite honestly I'm not going to be decluttering any of these either. These are like my larger eyeshadow palettes. So I have the BH Foil Eyes. This is the 28 eyeshadow palette. I recently picked this up, I want to say maybe during Black Friday. So this is a very, very new palette. I honestly have not even touched this yet, but I'm really, really excited to start playing around with this palette. So I am going to be keeping that. All of these palettes right here in the front are my face palettes. So I think I'm going to do a separate video for just my face palettes, but let me go ahead and take these out so I can show you guys the larger eyeshadow palettes. So these are all my large eyeshadow palettes. Let's start from the end here. This first one here is the Nude Beach palette. I recently picked this up whenever they had the Black Friday like 50% off sale, so I picked this one up during that sale. Then I have the Nude Dude palette and the Nude Tude palette. I honestly haven't decided if I'm going to get rid of these. These are two of the palettes, again, that I'm thinking about getting rid of. So I am adding these to my list of palettes to use for an entire week to see how I like them. I recently picked up the Naked Heat palette. I'm sure you guys have seen this everywhere on YouTube already. So far, I really like the palette, but quite honestly, it's not my favorite palette. I do have the Urban Decay Naked 1, Naked 2, and Naked 3. I'm sure you guys have seen these. I'm not going to be getting rid of these. These are absolutely one of my favorite all-time palettes. They are a bit on the shimmery side, but I really do like the shades in there. Then I have this palette from It Cosmetics. It Cosmetics. I've played around with it and I really like it. It does have some really unique colors in here, so I am actually going to keep this palette. I was thinking about giving it away. This is the Naturally Pretty palette. I don't know if I said that one. But I am going to add it to my list just to make sure that I really still enjoy that palette because I haven't used it in a bit. Then I have the Lorac Pro 1, Pro 2, and Pro 3. I'm definitely going to be keeping these. These are some of my absolute favorite eyeshadow palettes. I love the formulation of these. Every time I go traveling, I take these palettes with me. I'm going to be taking them to my sister's wedding because I am going to be doing the bridesmaids eyeshadow looks, and I really do love the formula of this. They last all night. Really love it. This is my chocolate or scented Too Faced palette collection. I do have a couple of the 9-pan palettes, but that sit in a different section. These are like the larger palettes. So I have the Peach palette. I have the new Clover palette. I really like this palette. I have the Bonbons palette, the milk chocolate, or not the milk chocolate, the semi-sweet chocolate bar palette, and then the original chocolate bar palette. This was actually my very first eyeshadow palette. My husband got me a gift card for Sephora for my birthday, and this was the first eyeshadow palette, or first makeup product I actually ever picked up, and that was about 3 years ago. And then I recently got the Too Faced melted or chocolate gold palettes. This actually reminds me of those like Makeup Revolution palettes. I don't know who copied who, but this is a really pretty palette. I just got this, so I haven't really played around with it, so it's definitely going to stay in my collection. And then these here are my Anastasia Self-Made palette, and I adore this palette. I really do love this. I wish it was permanent, but I'm so glad that I picked it up. Then I have the Anastasia Prism palette. I picked this one up over the Subculture palette. I have seen that the Subculture palette is on sale, and I'm tempted to pick that palette up, but I preferred the colors in the Prism palette better. And then, of course, the famous Modern Renaissance palette. I love this palette. I have two Lorac palettes. I have the Lorac Unzipped Gold and the original Unzipped palette. I enjoy these palettes, but I think a lot of the shades in here do look similar, but I still really love the quality of Lorac shadows. Same goes for this. I think this was part of like the California Dreaming palette or the Brunch palette or something. I think this was the California Dreaming palette, and I really like this one. I think the colors in here are really beautiful, and this is one of the peachy shades that I gravitate towards, and this one right here, that's why I got rid of the e.l.f. palette that had the peachy shades in here, because this has some really nice peachy shades in here that I preferred over the ones in the e.l.f. palette. And these two right here are both blush palettes, but the last palette I have in here is the Urban Decay Moon Dust palette. I wasn't going to pick this up, but it went on sale. It was like 50% off, and then on top of that I had a 20% off coupon at Ulta. So I got this for a really good deal, but I do want to start experimenting more with colors and glitter in particular, so that's why I picked those up. But I know that I have to use a glitter glue with this. You just have to know how to use that palette. Real quickly, I did actually forget to mention these two palettes. I am going to be getting rid of these two palettes. This is the Amazonian Clay Collector's palette. I just don't reach for this one. It does have some really pretty shades in here, and it also has some really nice blushes, but I quite honestly just don't reach for this palette anymore, so I am going to be getting rid of it. And this is actually a new eyeshadow palette that I got. This is the Estee Edits, the Edit eyeshadow palette. And quite honestly, I'm just not going to use this palette, so I'd rather just pass it along to somebody who I know is going to get better use out of this. It's kind of a cool palette. It has these like transforming shades, but they're just not colors that I gravitate towards. So I'm just going to pass it along. It's brand new, so I'm either going to sell this palette or pass it along. And then another palette I'm also going to get rid of is this Alpha Nude Rose Gold palette. I just don't use this palette enough to justify keeping it, so I'm just going to go ahead and pass this along. I've only honestly used this maybe 2 or 3 times, and I just didn't really like the formula of it. It's a dupe for like the Naked 3 palette, the more rosy toned one, and I prefer my Naked 3 palette over this one. That's it. Those are all of my large eyeshadow palettes. I told you I really wasn't going to declutter any of the large ones. That's because large palettes are pretty expensive, and because I do purchase these, I really make sure I do my research before I purchase a palette. So my larger palettes are the ones that I tend to declutter the least. I hope you guys understand what I'm talking about. So if you guys like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. I currently post 3 times a week on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and hopefully I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!